All right. What is up, my peeps? Joshua Smith here at GSD Mode Studios with another Leveling Up episode. And today I want to talk to you guys about motivation, what it is, how to go out there and get motivation, more motivation, get that motivation that I know that you crave, you want, you desire, that passion for life, that passion to go out there and just get shit done and kick massive ass. Now, a lot of people don't understand what motivation is. So they start chasing around, chasing the wrong things. First of all, a lot of people start to think, and I've been guilty of this too, until I understood it, until I got a deeper understanding of neuroscience, neurobiology, and what actually motivation is. It's a chemical experience that's taking place in your mind. I'm going to break down this for you today because you're in full control of it. There's nothing wrong with you if you're not motivated, if you're feeling discouraged, you don't have that drive that you want, that motivation that you want. We'll fix that right here in this Leveling Up episode. There's some work that you need to do this, and you got to be proactive with it, but it's 100% in your control. So if you're waking up, if you're feeling discouraged, you're not feeling motivated, maybe you don't have that motivation that you once had. I know it's been a crazy last fucking couple of years. A lot of people are demotivated right now, but again, this is something that's 100% in your control. I'm going to break this down right now here in this Leveling Up podcast. All right. So the first thing is to understand is, what is motivation? So your motivation, your drive, how you feel right now in this moment, how you're going to feel a couple hours from now and so forth, is due to a chemical inside the brain called dopamine. And it's really important to understand this. There's only one molecule, one chemical inside the brain that controls all of this. So again, if you think that because you're demotivated, there's something wrong with you mentally and that, oh man, I'm just not driven, whatever, it's because of this, dude. And I've had to go down this and discover this for my own internal work in my own self, man. It got to the point where I'm like, dude, I'm reading every freaking motivational book. I'm watching all these motivational videos. I'm doing affirmations. I'm doing all the shit that we've always been told to do. And it was like, look, there's times where I was on fire, motivated, but then there's times where I was like, dude, like I'm kind of depressed, kind of lost that like for life. It took me down this journey of really understanding this kind of chemical experience that's taking place in our mind from a scientific perspective. And I want to break this down for you guys because, again, it's something that you can change instantaneously within 24 hours. You can have that motivation back that you want and have it consistently each and every day if you choose to do the work. Okay, so dopamine, you got one molecule, one chemical that's inside the brain. It's called dopamine. I'm sure that you've heard of it, that the dopamine. And there's a great book out there that I read that, I've read a lot of books on dopamine, but this one book, really helped me get a good understanding of it. It's called The Molecule of More. And that title, really articulates what dopamine is. It's that desire to go out there and create more. We have what's called our here and now chemicals that allow us to experience the present, that allow us to experience, pleasure in the moment, that allow us to, and that's going to be your endorphins, your oxytocins, your cannabinoids, all of those different things. But there's only one molecule that gets you to go out there and be driven for that motivation, right? To have that passion. And that all comes down to dopamine. So that's the first thing to just understand, that this is a dopamine issue if you are feeling like you are not motivated to go out there and take action and for movement. Dopamine creates and controls our movement to go out there and take further action, right? So when you're feeling demotivated, like, oh man, I'm just not doing the tasks I should be doing in life. And one of my obsessions for a long time has been, why aren't we doing the shit that we know we need to do? We know how to do, we know that they're going to go out there and help us create the life that we want, but why aren't we still doing these things? Now, dopamine is this funky thing, and we live, it's not a funky thing, but it's just this understanding, but we live in a funky time, I should say. Dopamine, our brains evolved the way that they did with dopamine for survival. So we could go out there and dominate our space, collect the resources that we need, the future resources that we need to ensure survival, to ensure existence of us. Back in the day, long time ago, the purpose of life was just to freaking exist, to not die, to stay alive. Now life has gotten so good. And this is the problem that we all face today if we're not actively aware of this and taking proactive action on this, is that life is so damn good now today that we have to make up our own purposes, right? Like when I say life is good, it doesn't mean that it's without struggles. It doesn't mean that you're not having hardships. I'm not saying that. I get it. We all have hardships. We go through times and others go through harder times and, I get all of that. But overall, it's like food, water, shelter, overall safety, all that stuff for like just surviving and existing is provided for us or to us for the most part. And most, people, regardless of income level, have that, at least here, for those of you watching this that are here in the United States, right? So then again, like we had to get to the point where we got to make up our own purpose, and then from there, we are overloaded with things that are firing off our dopamine receptors, right? So dopamine is a chemical, again, in the brain that's created. It's created through neurotransmitters that then is, it goes into the neurons and gets accepted in the neuron and creates this euphoric kind of drive, motivational feeling internally that gets us to go out there and get shit done. It's the get shit done molecule, right? So if you want to think of it that way, it's the things that get you to pursue your dreams, get you to, not just pursue it, but want to pursue it and take action on those things. So then though, we got to understand like what are the things that counteract us. So counteract it. And how can we then control our dopamine levels to get it to use it in the way that we want it to be used. So the first thing, again, to understand is like we're in not outside of now that we know what it is, right? Is to understand that we are now in a society, in an environment where our dopamine hits are just bam, 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 they're constant, right? Like every time you jump on social media, every time, when you're playing video games, when you're watching, I don't know, like when you're watching Netflix or whatever the show may be, Hulu, Netflix, whatever it may be, we've all been there. You're watching this episode, you're like, oh, I'm just going to watch one episode tonight. Then at the end of it, it like has that cliffhanger and then you're like, oh crap, now I got to watch that other one, right? It's this uncertainty of what the future holds, right? That fires up that's a dopamine hit right there. So we need to be aware of this and these different things that fire off dopamine. Food does this. A lot of different things do this. So now we're in this society, in this environment where it is just overstimulated 24/7. I'm not saying that we can necessarily get away from that, but we can minimize it because we want to be able to utilize our dopamine in the right way. So let me just kind of go into a lesson of how dopamine works. So you've got this baseline of dopamine, because the thing that you got to understand is when you spike your dopamine. So let's just say you're at this baseline. I know a lot of you are listening to this. So I'll try to describe it the best that I can. But if you're watching this on YouTube, you can kind of see, my hand here, like this is the baseline of dopamine. Let's just say you do something. Let's just say like you're eating chocolate. So like a food, for example, can have up to a 200% spike increase in dopamine. So here's your baseline. Here's what your homeostasis baseline of dopamine release of what it is. You have a piece of chocolate or, sweet or whatever that fires that off, goes up 200%, right? Well, then from there, it doesn't just come back down to baseline. Right? What goes up must come down. And it comes down into an equal percentage, right? So it's going to go up 200%. Then it's going to crash and come down 200% below baseline. Then it's going to have to move its way back up to baseline. So that's why you might do something where you feel good as you're doing it, but then after the fact, you feel like shit for a little bit of time to go by, and then boom, you get back to baseline. So, certain things like nicotine through cigarette smoke, I believe is like a 250% increase. Food can be anywhere from like 150 to 250% increase. And different types of foods are going to spike this in a different way. And a lot of this comes down to your relationship with food. But like if you love chocolate, if you love sweets, it's going to spike that dopamine up further than it would like a piece of broccoli, right? So it's having this understanding of this. Things like sex, can spike it from about 100 to 200%. Gambling can spike it from 200%. I've heard studies that all up to 500%. Video games, there's a lot of still studying that needs to be done on video games, but it can be anywhere between 200% all the way up to 1,000% based on the video games and who's playing the video games and the relationship with those video games of that spike. So certain things like amphetamines, like cocaine or amphetamines, even like a lot of people will take certain supplements like Adderall, right, for ADD, and so forth. That feeling that you get on those stimulants, right? That feeling that you get that high. I mean, when we take certain drugs or whatever, we get that high. That is that dopamine, massive dopamine releases that are taking place and gets that kind of euphoric in that moment feeling, right? But the goal is because we got to understand, like with amphetamines. So let's just say, taking Adderall, whatever, or cocaine or, whatever it may be. That's going to increase it like 1,000% from baseline. But then from there, bam, you're 1,000% below. So I was, experimenting with Adderall for some time. And it was like, dude, when I was taking it, man, I felt amazing. But when I wasn't taking it, I felt like absolute shit. And it would take, depending on how long I took it for, this was years ago, and I stopped taking it for this reason, because it was like, okay, if I was taking, let's just say for a month straight, my body was getting used to it. Well, my body's getting used to being in this above baseline state. Well, then all of a sudden, when I wasn't taking it, it was going, again, 1,000% below baseline, where then I was just feeling like absolute shit. It might take 2 weeks to reset itself to get back to baseline. But here's the problem, right? We have this baseline that we're all firing, with our dopamine receptors at a certain rate. But when we're utilizing all these artificial stimulants and not just stimulants, but think of, when I say artificial stimulants, think also of every time you get on social media. Why does social media go out there and fire those dopamine hits? It's because of that unknown, that uncertainty. Like, when's that next exciting post going to come up? When's that thing, that drama, that whatever it is, that you jump on social media for, whatever it is that you're craving on there. And we all do it subconsciously, whatever. It's same. It's just, social media is built off the same technology that gambling is built off of, and so forth, right? So it's like that thought of, okay, I'm gambling. It's okay. That thought of, okay, I'm going to win money. It's that uncertainty, and then bam, do I win money? Right? Just firing off those dopamine receptors. Brilliant, scientists and psychologists that are helping formulate and create all of these devices and machines and platforms and so forth. So when I say substances, I'm also speaking of these, whether it be Netflix or social media or YouTube or whatever that, that is, you're watching porn, whatever it is that people are partaking in, that are firing these off, right? So you're getting these artificial outside things that are firing those dopamine receptors off constantly, right? Like, so we're constantly firing above baseline all day long because people today can't be bored. Right. So if you think of like being in a bored state, being almost like your natural baseline of dopamine, well, today people like to do that. They're unhappy. They're unhappy spending time with themselves, for the most part, whatever it may be. But they just can't be bored. Right. So it's just like, let me jump on my phone. Let me do this. Let me do this. Let me do this. All those things are, man, dopamine hit. Like, everybody just like, oh, I just want to be in a happy state 24/7. Well, that's very dangerous, right? Because dopamine is always going to balance out the pain and pleasure. It's pain and pleasure is created in the same element in the area of the brain. It's all the same process, right? So whatever that pleasure is, it's going to go then below baseline, and you're going to have that pain before it gets back to baseline, right? So, but then when you're artificially just bam, 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 going above baseline, well, that baseline then drops. So eventually, when you do reset and get back to that baseline, after all of this crazy, artificial stimulation, your baseline now drops. So even when you're at baseline, then now you feel demotivated. You feel like shit, because dopamine is all about motivation. So I'll give you a study that was done that might help articulate, how dopamine works in the brain. They took these rats. They had half of these rats that were just regular dopamine levels, because all human beings, lizards, all animals have dopamine. Like, we all have dopamine, right? So it's all the same process in all of our brains. Human beings just happen to secrete more, but we all have it, right? Because it's based on survival. So with that though, so they took these rats, and they took 50% of these rats, didn't mess with their dopamine levels, regular dopamine levels. They took this other 50% though, and they gave them a chemical that suppressed their dopamine. So at first they put them at this, okay, they be in front of this lever, they press this lever, food comes out, they eat the food. Now, both rats, the 50% with dopamine levels suppressed, and the other rats, both were pressing the lever, getting the food. All of that was great, right? Because dopamine doesn't control our ability to experience pleasure. Dopamine controls our pursuit to that thing that gives that pleasure, right? So if the food is right in front of us, we'll eat the food, right? The dopamine is like, okay, well, what gives me the motivation to go get the damn food? What gives me the motivation to get into the office and do the damn work, right? And so forth. So it's not necessarily the pleasure itself. Those are different molecules, different chemicals in the brain. Dopamine is the pursuit of those things. So then they took the rats. They're like, okay, we're going to take these rats then and move them a rat length, so a body length away from the lever. So that rat then had to move, a body length to the lever to press the lever to get the pellet of food. Now, the rats with healthy dopamine, regular dopamine levels, would move the rat length, click the lever, and then boom, the food. The rats that they suppress, so they shut off their dopamine secretion in their brain, they would not move the rat length to go press the lever, and they would die of starvation. right? So again, dopamine is about that movement. Dopamine is am I getting my ass into the fucking gym? Am I getting my ass into the office to do the damn work, right? Dopamine is that motivation for movement, right? So this is really important. That's why, if you're firing up these dopamine levels all freaking day long, 24/7, and then all of a sudden you're like, man, I just don't have the motivation or drive to take action. Right. And this is the problem with everybody, man. I've had this problem and I've had to overcome this problem by having a deep understanding of what I'm talking. Right now, I'm just education mode. Now, here in a minute, I'm going to give you what to do to fix this. But again, it's all in your control. That's the blessing of this, but it's not something's wrong with you. It's not that, like you need to go listen to some other freaking cassette tape that Rob motivate. You don't need to go walk across fire and get all pumped up like that, like if that works for you, cool, but it really has nothing to do with it. That's why that shit's so short lived, because you're not controlling the things that actually make the difference in this. So the key, though, is to make sure then you are minimizing the artificial stimulants that are spiking up. So when I say stimulants, remember that also means, whether it be social media and so forth, that are artificially firing off those dopamine levels so you can be at natural, healthy baseline levels as much as you possibly can. Now, if you have certain addictions, now addiction might be to, a substance, right? Like an actual amphetamine, stimulants, like I used to take a bunch of pre-workout and be addicted to like my pre-workouts before my workouts. Like I've given up all that crap now because I know how, the impact it has on my dopamine levels and so forth. But maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's porn, maybe it's video games, maybe it's gambling, maybe it's social media, whatever it may be. Like you might need to give these things up. And some psychiatrists that I follow that, are also neuroscientists that really understand dopamine at a high level. What they'll have their patients do is go through a 30-day reset on those things. So almost like a 30-day abstinence from that thing to reset their dopamine levels back to a natural state, which is whatever your thing is. We all have kind of our different drug of choice. Yeah, right. And again, that drug might be food. It might be an actual drug. It might be social media. It might be this different, like we're all going to have our thing, because a lot of this has to do with our relationship with that thing as well. Okay, so we want to get to that baseline and keep at that baseline as much as we possibly can. So what I recommend is what I've been doing that's made it, because it's like, look, okay, I got to jump. I'm going to, not that I have to, but I'm going to jump on social media at times, right? It's not like I'm never going to watch, I try to minimize and not watch TV as much as possible, but like my kids, if they're watching a TV show or a movie or something, I'm going to watch that with them. I'm going to jump, like it's not like we're going to go live in a cave and be a monk, right? But what I found that makes a massive difference is I minimize all of those dopamine firing things until after my core work is done. So I get up early, I go right into my core work. So no social media. Now, if I'm posting on social media for business, right, that's not firing the same dopamine hit as going through and scrolling and utilizing it for pleasure. Right. Or for those other things that we use it for. So I'm just going to make sure I minimize. So I eat a very bland diet. I drink nothing but water. I do drink some yerba mate tea. I've learned that yerba mate, which is a form of caffeine, yerba mate tea actually helps with your healthy levels of dopamine. So I'll drink a couple cups of yerba mate tea a day. But outside of that, man, my diet's, water, yerba mate tea, a couple in the morning to get a little, is needed, right? I don't always drink a couple, but as needed. I eat a bland diet, and then I'm getting into my core work, right? Before so no podcasts, no YouTube videos, no junk social media. I'm not watching, like none of that. I'll read a book, a physical book, right? If I'm reading, needing to read before, I get into work and so forth. But that's it. So I'm minimizing those dopamine firing activities until my core work is done. So then that gives me much more motivation to take action on those things. Because like, for example, if you were to jump on social media and you saw something that was super interesting, first thing that you jumped on there, well, then maybe you see something right after that wasn't as interesting, right? However, if you would have saw that second thing first, you would have found it very interesting. So a lot of times, maybe when you're getting in the office, you're like, dude, I don't want to do these emails. I don't want to do this leaf up. I don't want to do these activities. It's because you did other pleasure-seeking dopamine, firing activities prior to that. And now it makes those things feel that much less, fun, exciting, and so forth. I'm telling you, this makes a massive, massive difference. Now to take this to the next level. So get your core work done throughout the day. Then look, after all that, like have your reward. If you need to go on social media, if you want to watch some YouTube videos, if you want to watch Netflix, like do that in the evening after core work is done, and so forth. But if you want to take it to the next level, and this is what I've done, is minimize all of those things as much as possible. Like I've cut out all sweets altogether in my life. I've cut out all alcohol. I've cut out substances. Like I said, like pre-workout, like high hardcore stimulant substances, with that, I don't smoke. I don't do any of those things anyway. So those aren't firing it. But I minimize my time altogether on social media. So now for me personally, I don't use social media on a personal front. I only use it for business. And then, just cutting out TV, cutting out those things. Now, other things with this, because again, it's going to be, a lot of this has to do with the relationship with the activity that we do. So one key, if you really want to get this dialed in, where you're just like fucking on fire, like I am, for just life and just business and the things that you want to control this for. There's things I'm not on fire about, but I want to control my dopamine so they're on fire about the things that I want them to be on fire about that actually impact my life, right? So then from there, it's really pushing into the boredom, right? So for example, I do a 45-minute walk every single day. So I resistance train, and then I go do a walk also separate from my resistance train. Well, I used to always listen to a podcast or music during that walking, just being in nature and walking without that was kind of painful and it was boring to me. So then though, like I push into the boredom. So I'm like, okay, that's a sign to me then that I need to start walking without that music, without those podcasts, without those things, and force myself to be in that boredom, right? And this is why like things like meditation can also help with this and stuff. Those things that are kind of tough, like being in solitude, being by yourself, forcing yourself to push the pain of that boredom will help get you at baseline. And then over time, you can raise your baseline levels, your natural baseline levels of dopamine. So then that way you can have the motivation for the things that you want to have them to. And I know that this is a lot. There's a lot to this, in doing this. I got one more powerful thing to share with you guys. I don't want to say it's the most powerful, but it's extremely powerful. And it's definitely, at the top of the list here of controlling your dopamine. So kind of saving the best for last year. But all of these things build up and add to it. It really becomes about like, in order to plug into life and be truly fulfilled and be motivated and have that drive that you want, you got to unplug from this busyness of life that we have. It's just the way that it goes. A lot of people are like, oh, I just want to find my passion, want to find my purpose. Well, they're so fucking plugged in to whatever, all this crazy crap. Right? All these electronics, all this stuff. I gave up my cell phone for 6 months, my smartphone, and I went to a flip phone for 6 months. Every 6 months, I give up something that, I love or whatever, just to show I have control over it. It doesn't have control of me. And, the common thing I heard from people was, oh, I could never do that, man. I die without my phone. I'm like, dude, if your smartphone's becoming an appendage to you, and if you're going to die without it, then are you truly living? Right? Like my, I don't know. Now, if you're a real estate agent in production, actively in production, I personally wouldn't have given up my smartphone at that time because I needed it so much for business. I'm out of production. I've got a great admin team that can help with that stuff. So I have people to take the calls. I don't need to take the calls anymore. So it didn't hurt my business. I wouldn't do something like that if it's going to hurt your actual business, if you're not at a point where you can do it. But that's just an example, right? So really assessing these things and like, hey, are these things adding value to your life? Are they actually adding fulfillment? Are they giving you pleasure? Are they giving you, what you want and bringing you the things that you want? Is all this technology and shit that you're plugged into all the time, is it actually creating more leisure time? Is it actually allowing you to be more effective, efficient, and creating a better life for you? Yes or no? Right? It's a very, very simple question there and that assessment. And yeah, you got to make that hard decision, give it up. But if you don't make those hard decisions and give those things up or limit your use on those, right, and do the things that I'm talking about, then right, you're just going to be a fucking, not for everybody, but for the vast majority, 99% of people, we're just going to continue being zombies, walking through this life that are unfulfilled and not truly living. Because, dude, we're in a zombie culture, man. We got all these zombie companies, zombie banks, zombie financial institutions. But zombie people, man. People are just, like now that I don't use a phone ever anymore, I just see people just walk around like, I'm like, dude, nobody's fucking living life, right? Not saying nobody, but it's very rare. Like 1 out of 100 people, the people that I spend time with are living life. But when I'm just observing others out there, I'm like, dude, these people aren't living. This is not life, right? So you got to make that decision. Like, do I want to live life and live life to the fullest and have that desire, that motivation? I'm a big, I'm just kind of a science and medical kind of junkie, if you will, and studying a lot of these medical journals pre-1900s. When people back then, so like let's just say in the 1800s, 1700s, and so forth, it was very rare that when people came in, it was a serious medical condition. It was very rare when people didn't have like that for life. right? Like when they weren't passionate about life, when they, didn't have energy throughout the day, when they were demotivated, when they were demoralized, demotivated, just didn't have energy to get through the day. That was rare and like a serious medical condition, several hundred years ago. Now today, that's kind of like the default for everybody. Why is that? Right? It's all the things, there could be other factors to it, but a lot of this is the things that I'm breaking down, talking about with you here today. So dopamine, just to recap here, and then I want to get in this last thing, is about the domination of your environment and collection of resources to create a better future for yourself, right? And it's for survival, but our brains haven't evolved and rewired themselves with this modern day living that we're amongst, so you got to be more intentional than ever. Like we all live better, safer lives than at any other time in history, but people are more miserable and depressed and unhappy than any other time in history. So obviously this shit isn't working the way that, it's designed for most people, right? So you got to make those decisions with that. All right. So then from there, again, because with dopamine is about dominating your future and collecting future resources for a better future. Dopamine is the molecule, again, of more. So I got be more, okay. So it's all about, okay, I want more. I want to create more, right? It's, like the Elon Musks of the world have rapid firing levels of dopamine. Einstein, rapid, that's why like some of the greats like Einstein, Mozart, and so forth, because high, extremely unhealthy high levels of dopamine can lead to schizophrenia and so forth. That's why, you see, some, you get deep into the journals of some of the greats out there, like a Mozart, like, Einstein, they had some of those bouts, with schizophrenia and so forth. The Beautiful Mind, that movie, The Beautiful Mind, right? That was a dude. I mean, how they treat schizophrenia is they slow down the receptors of dopamine, right? So it can be unhealthy with too much. You're not going to get too much from doing what I'm talking about, right? It's either a genetic issue or you're taking a lot of drugs to get those firing off, to put you in that state. So this isn't going to happen naturally. So don't be, worried about that or scared of that. At least to my research, my knowledge, and I'm using myself as a test subject for this stuff all the time. But it's about that creating more. I want more, create more for the future. Big leaders of organizations and those that are doing big shit. And we're all entrepreneurs trying to create more for, like, that's why we're all here. That's why you're watching this episode. That's why you're in this industry, to go out there and create a better future life for yourself, for your family, and so forth. Right. So this is very important to us. Right. So then from there, the more clarity, because as I said before, dopamine used to exist because the purpose of life was just to survive. Now we've got to make up our own purpose. So the more clarity you can have on what your purpose of your life is. I'm not saying the purpose of life, the purpose of your life. What, right? Like life is meant to just go out there and exist and experience life. What are the experiences that you want? How do you want to live? What's your life plan? What do you want to create? What are you in this industry for? Right? When you get to X amount, when you're making $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, whatever it is in real estate, what does that lead to in life? How does that improve your life? What does that do? So you then know what is that you want, why you want it, why it's important to you, get extreme clarity on those things. Then when you have that plan, right, that each and every day that you're knocking out that checklist of that plan that is leading and getting you one step closer every single day, even if it's just a microscopic element that you can't really tell on a day-to-day basis, but it's just leading you one step closer each and every day, that is going to fire off your dopamine at very high levels, right? So a lot of times, the reason why her dopamine is low is because we don't have clarity on what the hell it is that we want. We don't have a purpose. I mean, look at life today. People are walking around this life with no purpose, no meaning of life. They're just fucking getting through life, being zombies, looking at their damn phone, debating and fighting over stupid freaking bullshit, right? They're lacking their own personal purpose, right? So the more clarity you can have on that, and then that plan that you are certain is the best plan, at least in the moment with the information that you have, and you're executing on that plan each and every day, that is going to give you that motivation. That is going to help fire off those dopamine circuits and so forth, because that's how dopamine is intended to be used in the brain. So it becomes really, really important, with that. All right. So this is how you go out there and get that motivation back. I know it's a lot of work, but here's the brilliant thing about this is like 1 out of 1,000 people that, I share all this information with my teammates. And so dude, very few people are going to do this type of work So it's like fishing with fucking dynamite when you're willing to do this type of work because you have no competition. Most people are like, oh, I want more motivation. I want to be fixed. No, they don't, right? They just want to bitch, moan, and whine because they're not willing to do the work. Words are hollow, actions show what you truly value, but if you're willing to do the actions, you do the work, man, not only will you be on fire and have massive amounts of motivation, but you will be, dominating your space, which will, dopamine is about domination of our space and create more future resources and so forth. It's just going to secrete that and exacerbate that and give it more and allow you to just go out there and crush at a higher level. All right. So my dopamine is firing at rapid rates right now. I'm getting too excited on this podcast. So I'm going to leave it there. Keep crushing it. Keep kicking ass. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you next time. Peace.